Well, I think we're going to go ahead and get ready and get going here. So I'd like to thank you all for coming here today to listen to us speak a little bit about GovCloud. Get the clicker going here, see if it's working good. So one of the things, we're actually going to start off with a little bit of a background on GovCloud because we're not sure how much everybody knows about this region that we have. We'll go on, and I'll actually hand it off to Keith here. And Keith will be able to go ahead and tell us a little bit about the features that are in GovCloud and the iteration over time in that space, as well as the users and the suitable use cases that actually fit into the GovCloud region. And most importantly, one of the things we've gotten from feedback in years past has been you don't want us up here as talking heads talking about what customers are doing with the space as much as you'd like to actually have those customers tell you. So we have two excellent use cases. Blew me away when I saw them because a lot of times we don't get to know what's going on actually inside the region ourselves because it's intentionally walled off from us. Only when we actually get to talk to customers do we get to know. And in this case, it's not only us that's going to know, it's going to be all of you as well. So we have two great use cases in that space. Planet Labs will be, I believe, up first, and then CSC following right behind. So just to give a little bit of background and history, about 5 years ago, we started to hear from customers that our model was great with the exception of one thing, and this was primarily from U.S. government customers, and that was that they needed a model which they could allow them to meet ITAR or export compliance requirements in the United States. Therefore, they needed a region that could be run both physically and logically by U.S. persons. So U.S. persons being U.S. citizens or green card holders or companies incorporated in the United States. So shortly thereafter, we internally committed to creating that region. And just over, it's like 4 years ago, August, we launched AWS GovCloud. When launching it, we actually took the mindset of launching with a limited service catalog. The EC2s, the S3s, the normal types of building blocks within AWS, and then let the customers literally tell us how to iterate on that, adding which services actually support their needs for the use cases that they're actually going to do in there. And that's roughly what we do in many other regions as well. In this case, my personal goal in this space was actually pragmatic parity. It's to be as close to parity with the other regions that we have, but do so in a pragmatic fashion that actually meets the customer set that is in that space. We've done a reasonably good job of now in the last few years actually adding a lot of services and features into the space, and Keith will go into great detail about those, or at least enough detail about those here in a minute. But one of the things that we continue to do is add services and features into the region. So one of the things I'd like to leave on the table, you'll see our contact information at the end of the presentation, is to feel free to reach out both directly to us as well as to your account managers if you're already using the platform, and provide that feedback, because iteratively we continue to add new things into the region based upon the feedback that you provided, very much like we created the region to begin with based upon that. So rather than hold us up any further, I'm going to go ahead and hand off the stage here to Keith. This is Keith. He's actually the Senior Business Development Manager for AWS GovCloud. It's all yours, Keith.
Thank you. So as CJ mentioned, we're actually pretty excited about the session today, not to just talk to you about AWS GovCloud, but to also share some pretty interesting and compelling customer use cases to help you guys understand what GovCloud is, what it's built for, and how our existing customers and end users use GovCloud today. But before we actually dive into that, we wanted to take a minute just to give a high-level overview of GovCloud because we assume that some of you in the audience may not be familiar with GovCloud. So we're going to take a few minutes just to cover some features, talk about the growth of the region over the past 4 years, talk about example use cases and example workloads, and then bring two customers on the stage so they can share what they're doing in GovCloud. From a feature perspective, there really is a set of core foundational features of GovCloud that typically lends itself to attracting customers looking to host their sensitive workloads on the AWS platform, but in situations where they may have unique or stringent regulatory and compliance requirements, right? So one of the core features that comes along with GovCloud is the fact that we restrict access to the region. And we do that by requiring all customers and account holders to meet 3 foundational requirements before we even start the onboarding process. Number 1, the account holder, so the person that's actually making the request for access to GovCloud, must be a U.S. person. And by U.S. person, that's defined as either a U.S. citizen or a green card holder. In addition to that, the U.S. person must be affiliated working with an organization that is a U.S. entity on U.S. soil. So U.S. person plus U.S. entity on U.S. soil. And then the third core requirement is that neither the account holder or the organization that is requesting access to GovCloud can be barred from handling export controlled data. So as part of our vetting process, we actually run checks to ensure that the account holder and the organization that they work for or are affiliated with do not show up in a State Department or Department of Defense database that says you have violated export control laws. Now, that applies regardless of if you're going to be using GovCloud for ITAR workloads or not. So 3 foundational requirements for access to the region. Beyond that, the region itself is physically located in the Pacific Northwest, specifically in the state of Oregon. The region also boasts some pretty unique features and characteristics that really differentiate it from our other regions on our platforms, including our 3 other U.S. regions. First and foremost, GovCloud is physically and logically isolated from all regions. So we do that by implementing machine, network, and data isolation. So for those of you who are familiar with AWS in general, you'll notice that when you log into your account and you launch your management console, there's a region selector up in the top right-hand corner. And you click the region selector, you get a drop-down, and it lists the regions that you can deploy resources in. You will notice that GovCloud does not show up in that drop-down, and that is by default on purpose. And it's mainly because we do separate from a data, network, and machine perspective so that you can only interact with GovCloud resources from your GovCloud account, and you cannot interact with GovCloud resources from your standard AWS account. Beyond that, GovCloud also has a separate identity and access management and authentication stack. So you get unique credentials for GovCloud that only work in GovCloud, which means you cannot log into your GovCloud account using the credentials from your standard AWS account, and vice versa. Beyond that, we also internally, from an AWS perspective, manage GovCloud and operate it with U.S. persons on U.S. soil. So the same requirements our customers have to meet for using the region, we have to meet as well. So from an operations standpoint, from a management standpoint, and even our service teams that all support GovCloud are U.S. persons on U.S. soil. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we do restrict access, and part of that restriction lends GovCloud to being deemed a community cloud. We control who gets access and who gets in, and typically because those customers all share some common characteristics around regulatory and compliance requirements, sensitive data, sensitive workloads, it does create this community cloud notion that a lot of customers and users find very attractive when they're looking to move to AWS. In addition, as CJ mentioned, the region itself boasts additional specific regulatory and compliance requirements and features, things like FedRAMP and HIPAA. It's ITAR compliant. It's also accredited to handle some of the most sensitive Department of Defense data as measured by the DoD Cloud Security Model Framework. Beyond that, it also has an additional security feature in the form of FIPS 140-2 validated endpoints. So for the endpoints for GovCloud services, some of those endpoints do have that FIPS compliance for customers that are looking for an additional level of protection for their workloads hosted in GovCloud. So who's using GovCloud and why are they using it? For those of you in the audience that attended our AWS Government Education and Nonprofit Symposium back in June in DC, you probably saw this chart. And for those of you that attended Teresa Carlson's Worldwide Public Sector Breakfast yesterday, you probably saw this chart as well. And we show it because we want to highlight that over the course of the 4 years since GovCloud launch, we've seen pretty significant growth in usage of the region to the tune of 273% year-over-year growth on average from 2011 through the end of Q4 of 2014. And I can attest that so far in 2015, we're actually trending higher than that. So it's really a testament that we see more and more customers, government-centric customers, but other customers that are not government agencies turn into GovCloud as well because of the security features and benefits of the region. And as CJ mentioned, we originally built the region for our core government customer base with either government proper workloads or government-oriented workloads, and that's for the US government across federal, state, and local governments. But what we've seen over the past 4 years is that there's been an increase in usage beyond just the government. So educational institutions and nonprofits and research institutions, FFRDCs, private industry, whether it's aerospace, defense, manufacturing, energy. We have usage from healthcare companies and financial services companies, all that find the unique features of the GovCloud region attractive for their sensitive data and workloads. We've also seen a growth of usage in our SI and consulting firm customer base, whether that is delivering services and products to their end customers that are hosted in GovCloud, or for internal uses where they're actually using GovCloud for some of their own internal corporate IT needs. Technology firms and software vendors. So whether that is a technology company that's looking to offer their products in the GovCloud region for users that are also GovCloud customers, or internally, similar to our consulting firms and system integrator customers, where they're turning to GovCloud to host some of their internal IT capabilities where they feel they want the additional services and features unique to the GovCloud region. Government resellers, managed service providers. Again, when you look at that growth over the past 4 years, a lot of it is coming from organizations outside of government proper. But all those organizations tend to share 4 common characteristics that we've noticed. One, they typically all have sensitive data and applications, which is driving them to GovCloud in the first place. 2, they typically have to adhere to strict regulatory and compliance requirements. In certain cases, they cannot use our other regions, even our other US-based regions. So GovCloud provides them a cloud platform that allows them to adhere to those regulations while still getting the benefits of our platform. The restricted community cloud preference, that's interesting because a lot of customers actually like the fact that we control who gets access to the region. And there's a certain comfort level with knowing that there are like-minded customers and like-minded users using GovCloud to host their sensitive workloads as well. And then finally, they want all of that with the benefits and the characteristics and the breadth of services that we have on our AWS Cloud platform. What we also found is that when customers typically come to GovCloud, a lot of them have data that falls into the federal government's description of controlled and classified information. And basically, controlled and classified information is 16 categories of data or information that, while unclassified, the US federal government has deemed sensitive. And it covers things like export control data, like we talked about ITAR, or intelligence data, or nuclear data, financial information, statistical data, intellectual property, agriculture data, legal information, critical infrastructure information, just a whole host of data that what we've come to realize over the years is that across the wide spectrum of customers using GovCloud, the majority of them have data that falls into those categories. And because we purpose-built GovCloud for those sensitive data and workloads, they tend to come to GovCloud to host workloads that have that information. And when we first built the region, we noticed that our initial set of customers were really using GovCloud more from the standpoint of a disaster recovery, COOP situation, or perhaps data archiving and backup. But over the years, we've seen growth in how customers are starting to use GovCloud. So they're looking at GovCloud to host websites and web applications. Some of our customers use GovCloud for development and test environments. And then we saw an interesting trend a few years ago where customers were starting to use GovCloud for things like business applications or enterprise IT applications, and enterprise IT infrastructure. One of the customers that's going to come up today is an example use case of using GovCloud to meet their enterprise IT needs. And then we started to see an increased usage for GovCloud for things like big data workloads, big data analytics, as well as high performance compute and things like mobile, which is pretty interesting. We have a customer or a set of customers that's actually using our mobile capabilities in GovCloud to adhere to things like CJIS from a law enforcement and public safety perspective. So very interesting. But instead of just talking about it, like CJ said, we want you guys to actually hear from the customers themselves. So we have 2 phenomenal customers we're going to bring up to the stage. The first one I want to welcome up, Troy Toman from Planet Labs. and Troy's going to talk about Planet Labs' use of GovCloud to meet their business and mission-critical workload needs. Troy?
Thanks, Keith.
Yep.
So Planet Labs is a aerospace startup company whose focus is to be able to create an image of the Earth every day. And so what we're basically using is CubeSat technology, cloud technology, a lot of sort of consumer-oriented technologies applied into the aerospace industry to try to, for a different take on Earth imaging. So what we do, or our plan is to launch a fleet of satellites into a sun-synchronous polar orbit that will basically continually go through around the Earth on the sunny side, taking pictures, on the dark side, transmitting them back to Earth, but essentially taking a picture every second. And as the Earth rotates underneath us, we will then have the ability of capturing the Earth every 24 hours so that we get a recency of imagery that is unavailable today. And a lot of these satellites, we've launched over 100 to date, get launched off the space station. In fact, this is a picture of one of our recent launches. We just put out 12 new satellites this week. And so we've been in this process over the last couple of years of launching 12 to 20 satellites at a time. We judge how they do, we iterate on the design, we move to the next generation, we push out 12 more, and have been going through this process, all setting us up for next year when we'll launch our sort of production fleet of satellites into that sun-synchronous orbit. This is what one of our satellites looks like. It is 3 CubeSats large, so it is 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters by 30 centimeters. Obviously a little bit larger with the solar panels folded out and available, but highly leveraging commercially available components so that we can build lots of these at a price much lower than traditional satellite technology, but also use agile design principles in the way that we build and evolve our capabilities. This is a ground station in New Zealand. So not only are we building our own satellites, but we are having to build our own communication ground station network. And this is an example of one of what will eventually be 30 of these ground stations located around the world that actually receive all of the images and communicate all of the commands and directives to the satellites up in space. And as I mentioned, we've put up over 101 satellites on 9 rockets. Maybe coincidentally, we've probably blown up more satellites than anyone because we were on both the Antares launch as well as the recent SpaceX launch. But part of our business model is that we can actually sustain that. So out of a series of 11 planned launches, we've had 9 successful and over 100 in operation. This is an example of a Planet Labs image that was taken over South Africa in August, so just a fairly recent one. Just to give you an idea, we do what's called medium resolution imagery, which is about 5 meters per pixel on average. And a big focus of what we're trying to do is to get into things like change detection and data recency. So this is an example of a Landsat image of an Oregon forest from March of 2014. And then just a little bit later, you can see that we came in and you could actually see changes in the foresting that was happening within the region on a fairly frequent basis. So we believe that over time, the ability to do this on a day-to-day basis will allow us to start noticing things that are going on in the Earth that are helpful in a wide variety of industries. So the way that this actually works behind the scenes to get all those images, we will have to put 150 satellites into a 470-kilometer orbit above the Earth. We will then build out these 30 ground stations and manage the network within that. That will deliver us somewhere, depends on sort of how big our images and what size pixels that we're using, but somewhere around 370,000 images a day, which also translates into 11 terabytes of data. And so what happens is we get the pictures from the satellites, we download them to the ground stations when we're in the dark side where we can't take pictures. We then transmit every one of those up into S3 storage in the Amazon cloud. And then we have a large series of post-processing operations that have to go on before that data becomes useful to our customer base. And actually, let me just, to go back to that, we have sort of two very distinct aspects of how we have to think about this internally, which is the spacecraft manufacturing and operations component, which is this part of actually building and flying and managing and communicating with the satellites. And then we have the sort of parts of our business that are taking the images, doing things like image rectification, color correction, color balancing, and detecting out of focus images, cloud detection. Turns out my cloud problems are very different than they used to be. My cloud problems are that 60% of the Earth is covered in clouds every day, which makes it very hard to take pictures because people don't want cloudy images. And so the interesting thing about our business is that the spacecraft manufacturing and operations side is ITAR regulated and export controlled. And so anything that talks to a satellite, records logs of commands going to a satellite, is under this set of regulations. Now, the image processing side is not. Once we have an image and it's down on Earth, we have much more flexibility on what we do with it. And so the flexibility that GovCloud and Amazon gives us is being able to service both of these parts of our business in a way that's economical and efficient for them as well. In terms of challenges, look, the first challenge I've got is it's 11 terabytes a day, every day, forever. And that's a lot of data. Not only that, but we have to do that in this compliance environment. We do it in the environment where our satellites are changing every couple of months. The use cases that we hear back from customers, because this kind of recent data has not been around before, is changing every day. And we have sort of multiple products, right? Some people want pretty pictures. Some people want accurate pictures. Some people only care about pictures of China. Some people care about pictures of South Africa. And that moves around. So it's not like I have a good set of use cases that I know when we go to production we're going to have to be able to leverage. The other thing is that we do a lot of very complex compute-intensive processing on these images. So every one of these images comes down as a 5 megabyte roughly picture, but then we have to blow it up and expand it. It turns out that you can have a pretty good idea of where you're pointing when you're 450 kilometers above the Earth, but it turns out just being off by 1/10 of a degree might mean you're 200 kilometers away from where you thought you were. So we have to go through this extensive process of taking every image, mapping it to a set of known ground control points, and being able to accurately, within 3 meters, be able to tell you that this image was of exactly this place. And that takes a lot of compute time, which in some circumstances would be cost ineffective, but I'll explain a little bit more about how we do that. So what could have been is we started this small company with 100 people, and the first thing we'd have to do is figure out how to get a procurement group, how to worry about physical security for a data center, how to manage inventory of inbound stuff, keeping up with 11 terabytes of stuff a day, a DC ops team, server provisioning team, a private cloud operations group, network management, hardware maintenance. And the reality is, when I got to this company, we were 120 people who were trying to do everything from designing onboard CPUs, managing optics from cameras that are shooting from 500 kilometers above the Earth, managing the manufacturing of those boxes, the building of ground stations, the management of ground stations, and all of the software pipeline in between. Hiring a bunch of people to do this stuff would have added very little value to my business, but obviously it could have been required, except that we were able to get rid of that by being able to leverage GovCloud as a mechanism to get us started on the manufacturing side. So the real reason we're here is because this does not help us become a better, faster, more agile aerospace company, and we don't have to do it because of what AWS does for us. So what our environment ends up looking like is that we run the spacecraft manufacturing and operations over in GovCloud, US Gov West, and then we run our production systems that work on the images in the regular US West 2 environment. So on the spacecraft side, we make heavy use of RDS. Postgres-based RDS is the back end of our database. I think at one point our database instance was a 3 terabyte database instance. We're using Amazon S3 for logging and background data storage, managing our domains through Route 53, and we have lots of instances all tied up in a VPN that is routed into our corporate network, but with all the provisions and sort of access controls that we get access to as to who can go in and work with those machines. So that ties back into some centralized systems. On the data pipeline side, it looks very similar. We're actually running some native Postgres on EC2 in addition to doing it through RDS. We're using the AWS import-export, and actually very excited to potentially be getting some of the Snowball stuff because we have acquired another satellite company that has 3 petabytes of satellite data that we need to get up into S3. We make heavy use of spots. We use as many as 5,000 concurrent spot instances to crank through our data pipeline job, but that allows us to do it at about a tenth the cost of what the on-demand would be, and Route 53. But I think the real win for us is sort of this central column. Because we're using the same APIs and the same basic infrastructure, we can leverage the same SAML infrastructure for tying into IAM. We use the same Ansible roles. We use Jenkins for our CI system. We have to deploy separate Jenkinses, but we do that with a single Ansible role. So we're not having to rewrite the infrastructure that deploys and manages and updates those two things, even though one's isolated and protected in GovCloud and one's in the regular environment. So we can use the same tools. We're using Git. We're using, again, a different Git instance in GovCloud versus GitHub in the public, but the interfaces are the same. So the workflows and the tools that the ops team internally uses doesn't change. And we're also able to share a lot of the analytics that we do through Datadog. Our logging, messaging, ticketing systems can all be centralized. And using largely Python and AWS command line tools to do those interfaces saves us from having to sort of have completely separate teams doing completely separate things and not learning from each other. We expect to expand on this. In fact, our spacecraft team has been one of the first ones to do some testing around DynamoDB, but we'll probably start leveraging that on both sides. And I'll put in my plug now for ECS and the registry for containers, because we're moving to that in the US West too, and we'd love to see that in GovCloud as well. But we are gradually evolving and starting to use more services and sharing our experiences between the two teams. I was told this was supposed to be technical, so I didn't get source code in here, but I can give you an idea of what our Ansible playbooks look like. But this is an example of the directory structure around our Jenkins playbook, where we have these standard environments, so we can talk about pre-prod, we can talk about our prod environment, we can talk about space, and those just become environments that we run our Jenkins playbook against without having to maintain them completely separately for the two parts of the business. And then we have a lot of shared roles around things like how we interface through our SAML environment, how we bring up sort of our Datadog and Elasticsearch instances, and so it allows us to get a lot of common infrastructure code in terms of how we manage these things, and simplifies the process a great deal. And given the amount of change and fluctuation in our enterprise, that's really important for us. So I'll just sort of summarize. Our goal is to figure out how we can allow commercial access to space, and really take advantage of consumer technologies, really both from the cloud standpoint, and leveraging what we do with AWS, but even if you look at one of our satellites, it's a gross understatement, but it looks a lot like an Android phone with a big lens attached to it, because we've tried to take basic commercial components in order to lower costs and allow to do this. And hopefully what we end up with is a data set that's available to a lot of different people for a lot of interesting things that benefit certain business applications as well as the planet. But anyway, it's worked out very well for us, and we're real excited to be running all of this on a combination of GovCloud and the rest of AWS. And I think I'll be around for questions afterwards, and so I'm going to turn it back over to Keith.
Thanks, Troy. It's really interesting stuff. So we want to bring up next a customer that actually was one of our first original partners for AWS and GovCloud, but has since transitioned into the customer role as well around that enterprise IT use case that I talked about a few slides ago. So happy to bring up Jonathan Check, VP of Enterprise Solution Services for Computer Sciences Corporation.
Thanks, Keith. All right. Either GovCloud is a lot more exciting than I thought, or Keith's spreading a rumor that there's a Teresa Carlson bobblehead giveaway. Not sure which. But like I mentioned, I'm John Check. I'm with CSC. I'm responsible for all the IT solutioning, whether it's on new work or on existing programs. So get right into it. Based on what you can expect, we were presented with a business problem of CSC was going to separate into two companies. Then how did we attack that? Based on using our hybrid cloud strategy, leveraging the partnerships that we have, like Keith mentioned, being going to market with Amazon, but then also now becoming a customer. All right, so our challenge. In May of this year, CSC announced that they're going to split into two separate companies. So one that's commercially focused and the other that's 100% focused on the federal government business. that presented a huge challenge for us. The first thing that came to my mind was, great, we're going to do this. The date is October 1st. That coincides just perfectly with the government's end of year. So I was already planning to be busy during the government's fourth quarter, so now I can be busier. And then, in order to decrease the complexity, we decided to go for the triple Lindy, which was, well, we're also going to then, 2 months later, we announced a merger with SRA International. I'm not going to get into that today. That's really probably a presentation for another day. But I'm really focused on the separation of CSC and how we're focused on dividing the systems that really run our enterprise IT and our back office systems from a company that's 56 years old, and how do we separate those systems into two completely separate, publicly traded companies. As you can see, we had approximately 200 apps that needed to migrate by October 1st, comprising a number of servers across multiple data centers, lots of different provider types, lots of different infrastructure, and of course across all the different application areas, whether it's HR, finance, payroll, security, and others. And then, separate what the entity that's being created is, out of the 70,000 people that are currently in CSC, 14,000 will be part of CS Gov that will be separating out. Let's see, anything else I want to cover on here? All right. So clearly I've been drinking my own champagne from a very early age. But so how are we going to attack this problem? Well, one thing we wanted to do is we have our own processes. We're a premier partner with AWS. So we're going to use our own CSC, the migration process we have, which is focused around the shape, transform, and then managing the environment. That goes through the application discovery, the cloud assessment, figuring out what the target platform and architecture is going to look like, all the way through to application treatments, and then finally to the operate and maintain. So shape for the first step. So first thing we need to do is do our application discovery. And with anything, to start off right, you need to make sure you do a lot of planning, really understand what your environment looks like. So as a part of that, we did a discovery of our application portfolio. You can see the kind of the breakout among the different groups of where those applications reside and who the key stakeholders were, as well as creating the app data flow diagram that's associated with those applications. From that, we really had to figure out, okay, we need to assess these and which ones are going to move to the cloud, what's going to be the treatment we're going to apply to them. As you can see, we had a certain percentage, I think it was 11%, that were going to be retained by the CSC Corporation, the commercial side. There was about 40% that were shared. So there's some splitting that had to go on there between that CSC is going to use and CS Gov we're using. And then there was a good portion based on, of course, our reporting requirements for DCA and others, where we already had some systems that were standalone, only focused on the public sector side of the business. So with that, of course, we had to create our cloud adoption roadmap and really define the scope and figure out what our targets were of where we're going to move these different workloads based on what we had was an extreme time constraint, right, of less than 4 months to move these workloads. And ensuring that we could meet the business need and really drive the value and not be a publicly viable company with systems that will support that in a very short time frame. All right, so why AWS GovCloud? One of the best conversations I had with this, and this is probably, we might have squandered the first 2 to 3 weeks of the whole opportunity with my team saying, well, let's go down a traditional method. We're going to buy servers, we're going to fill a data center with stuff. And I said, hold on a second, we're not going to do any of that. We're going to use AWS and we're going to use AWS GovCloud. So then immediately the next blocker was GovCloud, that's just for the government. We can't use that. And I said, no, we can and we are, because we need those same controls. We have the same threats that the government has, the advanced persistent threat. Every day you can look at the next security breach that happened in government, and we're under those same, we feel those same pains, the same cyber attacks, same space. So based on that, once we got through the retooling of the workforce to recognize that, yes, we do need to use cloud, and yes, it is going to help us meet our goal. And with the next step was the AWS GovCloud, which is, it has the FedRAMP controls, which is something our customers use. It has the stuff around HIPAA and personal identifiable information that protects our HR systems. ITAR compliance, which is something that we have to adhere to as well. And then, what made it a really easy decision for me was the fact that we were already a partner with AWS, so why aren't we using them? And one of the key differentiators that CS Gov has as going forward is really that we will ensure that whatever we're using internally, we're also getting the lessons learned from that and driving that value to our customers. That's one of the core around everything that we did as a part of the separation, was to ensure that everything we were doing, we were documenting and figuring, okay, now how are we going to leverage this in the public sector space to drive these solutions into our clients? All right, so next is, or the second step is transform. So, okay, we did the portfolio, we figured out where those apps are. Now we got to figure out what treatment we're going to put against them. So you can see we still have quite a bit of opportunity to move to the cloud. There is one additional treatment on here that I didn't put on the chart, which is the embarrassing treatment, which is some things just weren't being used and we just turned them off, right? So there are some things in that environment when you go and you start doing the assessment, you realize, well, there's a server out there with an application running on it, but nobody really uses it. So whoever was responsible for that or whatever happened, nobody took the time to decommission that system. So that was one of the treatments. But then also there were certain things we didn't have to migrate, where CS Gov, we're going to own the physical security, and the system was already in a data center that we were going to control post-split. We didn't be able to migrate those with the time constraint we had. We put a V-block on a pickup truck and drove it from New Jersey down to North Carolina for one of our treatments. That was the easiest way to get it out of the commercial data center to ours in the time frame we had. And then, of course, I'll skip to the final one before getting back to AWS. We have other software as a service providers. So the CSC commercial side used Salesforce.com. So we migrated our Salesforce data to the GovCloud instance of Salesforce.com for that. So we leveraged across our whole hybrid environment. And then finally, where we could, we migrated workloads to the AWS GovCloud. So we migrated over, at this point, more than 200 servers and probably 40 plus applications. But then, as you can see, we have a lot of opportunity to really continue to transform the environment. One of the things that we had to ask ourselves is not only the time frame we had to do it, but also somebody has to catch all this stuff and operate it once we do make the change. So we had to make sure our team was trained up. So part of it as well of our decision making was, what are we ready for as a business? And can we still support these systems? If we drive too much change, is that going to create too much breakage? All right. So for the migration, the transform continued. I'll skip the first part, the physical CS Gov data center. That's tried and true. I think everybody knows how that works. But really, I'm focused on the middle part, which is the AWS GovCloud. So this is where, I didn't want us to suffer from trying to think that we're the smartest people in the room, in the sense of my engineers, they're going to get a whiteboard, they're going to start from scratch and draw up a solution of how we're going to migrate our workloads to the cloud. That was kind of the path I think that my team initially wanted to go down. We said, no, we're going to focus on the great partner network that AWS has. One of the reasons that I wanted to make sure that, that's the value of AWS, was the partner network that surrounds it. So we got great partners like Racimi, who came in and really helped us. Lawrence and Steve and the team really focused on ensuring that we were using some of those best practices based on all of the times that they had migrated workloads to AWS. So why would we do something, try to create something new or use something that was lesser known, as well as risk networks to help us with the discovery for the applications and help enable that workload migration. And of course, the professional services team at AWS helped us with some of the run books and some of the best practices around the architecture. I don't know if Charlie and Rodney are in here, but they were great help to us in really providing that additional depth and best practices that AWS has to ensure that we were successful. So there's no way that we would have had the success we have to migrate all those servers in the time frame we did, which ultimately I think the migrations all occurred over probably a 60-day period. Once we got everything, the planning done, the agreements done, we did all the contracts, all that stuff. The teams, once they got turned on to do the work, completed in about 60 days. Quite remarkable. And then, like I mentioned, with the lucky happenstance of the triple Lindy of giving us more time with the announcement of the SRA merger, we got a little bit more time to do some testing that we might not have had. So we still kept to our schedule and really using this time to test a little bit more. I can't say enough about the importance of having that partner network. That's ultimately what made us successful in this. And without that, I don't think that we nearly would have had the the success that we did, and that's one of the true values that CSC is looking forward to, and how we drive these solutions to our customers, to ensuring that we got that strong partner network that's going to help us be successful and help our customers be successful. Let's see what else. So of course, we used agile methodologies across this whole time frame to ensure that we're failing fast, and the teams had very quick sprints, 2-week sprints, and focused on ensuring that we could migrate these applications as quickly as possible throughout this. That didn't just apply to, that really applied to all parts of the execution process. Go to the next. So our architecture. This is where the AWS team really helped provide a lot of value. So one of the things, sure everybody's familiar with, but at the account level is where the top level of control really as a consumer of AWS. So in order to ensure that you minimize your blast radius, so if there's people working on something, chances are they're going to make a mistake sooner or later. So how do you contain that? So within our architecture design, we decided to set up 3 different accounts, production, a test, and dev accounts, to help minimize that blast radius. That means whether people are making a mistake that they shouldn't have, or running against hard or soft limits within the instances. I know we made a few calls to Keith to increase the limits. I think that just happened again yesterday, most likely. So it's one of those things that definitely has come into play to ensure that we're maintaining that control to where the identity and access management across each of those instances is isolated. So if you have a problem in one area, it's not going to manifest itself across the others because they're in separate accounts. We did consider, we talked a little bit about, not long, but okay, how far would we want to take that? Would we want a separate account for each application? Or are there specific applications where they're that critical you'd want to have that separate account that are larger than most? But we really felt that this was the best approach for us, provided the added complexity we'd have and the tools automation. It really wouldn't make it worth it for us to go down the path of creating a huge proliferation of accounts. But it's definitely something that we looked at that maybe the right approach for others, but it really didn't make sense for us. Additionally, what this provides us is the the ability to get chargeback and showback across these 3 different environments. So with that, we can kind of see what is the dev environment costing us to run, and within that, of course, we can tag the assets within there to specific applications, and use Cloud Checker to verify that have we tagged the assets, and how are we using chargeback to ensure that we're getting the right utilization, and we can go back to each business and say this is what your application is cost the company to run. Can we do something better? Can we do something different? Because ultimately, we want to ensure that we're optimizing this environment, which I'll get to. And of course, towards the bottom, you can see, like I mentioned earlier, we have a hybrid cloud environment. We use SaaS providers, which have their applications running on clouds, and we have our 2 legacy data centers. And of course, we have our integrated technology center in Bossier City, which is where we provide our delivery out of for the operations. All right, a little bit deeper into the architecture. So as a best practice for AWS, we really focused on, for each VPC, creating multiple public, protected, and private subnets across our 2 availability zones. What that gives us is the ability to ensure that we can provide the right access to the internet to each server. So whether a server needs direct access, whether it needs proxy access or no access based on the functional and technical requirements, that's one of the things that provide us the flexibility. And then the way we would isolate the applications within that environment is through, excuse me, a hypervisor-based firewall to secure the EC2 instance. And like I mentioned, it all ties back into the WAN because this all has to work seamlessly across all the applications and services that we're delivering through our architecture. All right, so we'll get into, Integrated Technology Center, I have to plug that for us real quick. That's a public partner, public-private partnership we have with the state of Louisiana. We're working with Louisiana Tech and Bossier City Bossier Parish Community College to drive next-gen workforce in an area where historically there has not been the IT, through to our Integrated Technology Center, where we provide where we run our ServiceNow ITSM instantiation out of that we can deliver across as a leveraged service across multiple clients. Our NOSC, Network Operations and Security Center. That's where we deliver our managed service. So with again, like I mentioned before, we're really driving towards a leverage model. So everything we're doing and consuming, we're also passing on that benefit to our customers because it's all about scale. And that scale is whether that's the scale that AWS provides to help us drive out optimization and keep our infrastructure costs down, but it also applies to the people and the operate and maintain that's associated with this environment. If we can leverage that staff and those processes and the people across our customers as well, that helps ensure that our people see all kinds of different problems and changes within an environment, so it gives them a much broader knowledge base, as well as it helps us do things as a service versus by the person. So it's unit-based, outcome-based versus person-based, and having people sit around like the Maytag repairman waiting for something to happen. Let's see. The other thing is, so where we started, we were going to do a lift and shift, right? Where we are right now is we've moved things to the cloud, and we're getting ready to start the optimization phase and continue our journey to ensure that we're going to drive more of our workloads to the cloud. Once we get through the separation, merger, dust settles a little bit, we'll do some assessments to ensure that we're getting the most value. So we want to make sure that we're taking the dollars out that we would have been spending for capital and other things and drive those back into our business to ensure that we can provide more value to our customers. Let's see, so success stories. Success is number one, a hybrid environment. It works. It works well for us. And that's something that fit our business. We couldn't necessarily go all in on cloud. It didn't make sense based on where we were, not only from maturity level, but also from the different technologies we planned on using. And what we want to make sure we're living the same life that our customers are. We get that firsthand perspective and have some empathy for what they're going through. Next is a plan for bandwidth. I mean, that was one of the big drivers. So as a part of this, we had to stand up a lot of our own circuits. So we had the bandwidth issues, not only from just transferring data, but also some places we didn't have the circuits that we needed in order to do the work. Next, I think I touched on this before. The importance of planning can't be understated. That's what it all comes down to. And keep pressing the button. And the use of AWS rapidly improved our time to value. So in that sense, we couldn't have done it in the time frame we needed to if we had a traditional method. And even with other cloud providers, didn't feel that we could do it because the partner network wasn't there to ensure that we could make the time frames we needed to. Of course, we used agile methodology to help drive very quick change, fail fast. And then as well as we used our own process and methodologies, and we've taken those lessons learned. We recently won a big opportunity with the FAA. We're going to drive those lessons directly towards the FAA to ensure that they're not have to learn from they can learn from the value and the lessons that we have. Finally, on some of the success stories, really we have a true DR at this point. So we really have reduced our recovery time. It's the classic days to minutes, and now we have the transparency where before, when they were standalone systems sitting in our data center in rack, it was the server administrator saying, "Trust me, you have DR." Now we know we have DR. We've architected for availability zones. We've done all the things to ensure that we know that we've done what we need to based on best practices to have the uptime and availability we need. All right, now I'll go to lessons learned. So there's no magic bullet for an enterprise migration. It takes hard work. It takes a partner network. Part of it, what we had to do, we did have to do about 20% of our migrations to AWS were manual efforts where we had to manually do the work. So it's not as if there's the magic tool that's going to solve all the problems, but through the partner network, we could help identify what those systems are that have a high chance of really having not being a good candidate to do the automated flow that might need to go through a traditional migration. Let's see. No re-IPing, so that was one of the goals we had, but we couldn't quite achieve that. So that's one of the things that you have to expect that you're going to have to do some re-IPing, especially in a large-scale migration. And keep in mind, right, we moved over 200 plus servers, 40 plus apps from a company that had been around for 56 years, and there was a lot of cloning of existing data, and things might not have been optimized the way they needed to work in a cloud environment. So that required that. And finally, most importantly, utilize your partner expertise. Can't go in there with the attitude that you're the smartest person in the room and you're going to solve it all and I don't need anybody's help. I've been doing this for however many years and I know better than anybody. And so we really took that to heart. We didn't do it so much at first, but I think over time that I'm really starting to see that it turned around and our team really does value the knowledge that our partners had. And it was a good collaboration. I think we both sides learned a lot, either the partner network and us, and I think we're all better for it, and we'll be able to deliver not only for ourselves much better, but also for our customers. So I think with that, Keith.
Thanks, John. So as we wrap up, we just want to leave you with a few things, key points just to keep in mind with GovCloud. First and foremost, to reiterate, it is a physically and logically isolated region. So separate availability zones, an independent management console, a separate identity and access management and authentication stack, as well as unique endpoints to the region. So it really is truly a isolated region as part of our AWS platform. And again, the title of the session is AWS GovCloud, not just for Govies, right? So not just for government entities. And I can attest to the growth and some of the stories you've heard today from Troy and John that, beyond government, many private sector customers are starting to use AWS GovCloud. We have education institutes, nonprofits, like a whole litany of customers that are starting to leverage the GovCloud platform when they have sensitive workloads or if they have to meet certain compliance and regulatory features. And then we just want to reiterate the AWS shared responsibility model. That still applies to GovCloud. So while we offer certain compliance and regulatory features, it is still the customer's responsibility from the application layer up. So although the region itself is ITAR compliant and has HIPAA and FedRAMP, it's still the customer's responsibility to ensure that they are still controlling access to their applications and data hosted in the region. A few links for you. Our AWS GovCloud webpage, so that's kind of one-stop shop to see which services and features are in the region. You can read more details on our compliance regimes, as well as see things like certain instance types and things of that nature that are in the GovCloud region. In addition, our GovCloud Users Guide is kind of like our Bible, so if you want to dive deep on certain services, really assess the ITAR boundary per service and things like that, all of that information is covered in our AWS GovCloud User Guide. And then as CJ mentioned, if you have any questions, you want to learn more about GovCloud, you want to talk about certain use cases, you're curious about which technology companies and software vendors have their products offered in the region, definitely feel free, shoot us an email. My information is up there as well as CJ's, and we will definitely get you squared away. And the obligatory complete your evaluation chart. So again, thank you guys for coming today. We will actually take questions in the hallway here. If you have any questions for me or CJ or John or Troy, and actually I saw Rodney, there he is. So we have our AWS professional services team here as well, so if you have questions about how to leverage professional services to do some of the migrations, feel free to grab us in the hallway. Thank you guys.